now. Great games in the morning. There we go. Great games in the morning. This is Jonathan Albin, and I am the Game Master. And on Game Master's Soapbox, I go through several points of conversation and try to share with you guys some of my insight, having been a Game Master for almost 50 years. So, today's episode: constructive use of plot armor. I know that's not a popular concept to discuss, and so when we do so, I hope you understand there's some of my presentation is somewhat tongue in cheek, and I'm wanting to make sure that I help you every way I can make your games more exciting and more fun. And in order to do that, we have to sometimes get past some of the biggest problems in that happen. And when you are a storyteller, a game master, you really have to decide what your style of gameplay is. And most of us have a general idea of a story we'd like to tell, something we've got in mind. In my case, I've got 47 years, 48 years worth of experience that has driven it to the point where it is. But other people have either a tighter grip on what they want or a looser grip, as it may be. And so they are either more clearly defined as a railroad mechanic in terms of their game style, or they are a sandbox digger. So either which way, we're going to be talking today about the use of plot armor. Now, the question will be what that is, and we will get to plot armor in a few minutes, but we're going to talk first of all about classic railroad defenses. And the reason this is mentioned in particular is that the first style of play that most people are familiar with is the concept of the railroad. And that is the storyteller, the game master, has a module or a piece of work that he wants to work through. And it has a series of events, A, B, C, D, and so on, that he wants to go through. And because he's looking at a book and reading it out of a printed material, it has an agenda and a sequence, A to B to C, and so on. The concept, therefore, is that the story that has to be told or that he wants to convey is going to be tracked in just such a way, A to B to C. And so, therefore, he wants to play it right by the book. And the classic railroad structure is so pervasive that many players, either they've never ever understood what a railroad was, or they've never been in a sandbox at all and don't know what to do once they were there. So we will get to all this as we go. But when we talk about classical railroad defenses, what we're talking about classic railroad defenses, what we're talking about are basically the walls and gates. And a wall is a portion of a story that there is nothing beyond it. The story only goes that far and stops. So a wall can be a story ender if it's placed at the end of a position. This usually has to do with the player not being experienced enough to think beyond what the framework that he's been creating, and doesn't have a concept of what to do beyond that point. And so walls are pretty difficult crossover points because the person who's running the game simply doesn't know how to go beyond, doesn't know what there would be beyond it. It just is almost a mental block. And gates are similar in that, generally speaking, the storyteller has a objective that he wants to accomplish and only allows the players to go beyond that point when they've gone through sections A, B, C, whatever they need to be accomplished. This is evident, for example, in a person who's running a module who won't permit you as a player group to move past the outer walls of a town and start to worry about what's inside until you face the specific defending monster or the NPC that you're supposed to meet or whatever. And this is when the railroad becomes most evident, because you are now faced with the limitations of the story in terms of what you can or cannot do. So classic railroad defenses are only simply that. Either you can go through the situation as written, and then you are protected and bounded by walls on all sides, or on occasion you'll have opportunities to make decisions, but they will be limited to what is permissible by the gates that the game master has put in place. So those are. This camera's freaking out on me today. I don't know what's going on with that. Maybe I'm moving around too much. Not sure. Or I'm vibrating the table. I don't know. The second kind of defenses that you may run into in a game are the story preservation natural defenses, and that is if a story says your engagement should end with a this or a that, then the story is protecting itself and has naturally built defenses to keep the players from overstepping boundaries or getting into places where the storyteller could be in trouble as far as what he can come up with creatively. So, story preservation defenses are generally also fairly easy to understand, and the game master can pick them up relatively easily by simply reading through the materials. And so these are not nearly as strident as the wall, perhaps, of a railroad defense, but they are still difficult for the players to be able to accommodate because they may want to do something that's completely off the chart and not being listed. The next kind of defenses are the game master heavy lifting tools. And when I say heavy lifting tools, these are the parts where the game master has to bring in a big hammer and make things happen the way he or she wants. And some of the most common heavy lifting tools that a game master might use would be the concept of a deus ex machina. And those of you that are familiar, it is now a theatrical term, and deus ex machina is referring to it actually means literally a god in a box or god in the machine, but the deus ex machina was a method in the arsenal of ancient story writers and poets to allow for the very nature of the supreme being to interfere in a story by making an appearance within the story. And so Deus Ex Machina was simply, okay, I didn't remember to give you a piece of the story, and so my deity can appear, and suddenly you have the special piece of information or the extra tool you need to win or whatever. And this is a very ham-handed, heavy-handed way for a game master to move story along. It avoids the player's agency, and it provides a method that at least has some form of description to it. So it's more sophisticated perhaps than the railroad defenses, but it really is a problem. Now there are other examples. Another heavy lifting tool is something known as a MacGuffin. And the MacGuffin, the camera is driving me crazy. I'm going to just figure out how to fix that automatic setting to stop being automatic. And I don't know how we're going to do it. The MacGuffin is the device that a storyteller will put into a story that has particular characteristics that allow for things that need to be overcome in the story to be overcome. For example, in the case of Lord of the Rings, the aspect of the ring that allows its bearer to become invisible and move from point to point without being seen is integral to the plot, in that when Bilbo steals it, he's able to move around without being spotted. And it therefore allows the protagonist to escape from the imprisonment that the story had put on him. But it's also therefore problematic because it's always there. So later when Frodo has the ring, yes, he can turn invisible, but in order to put more of a burden upon it, they made drew more attention to the fact that it put him into another dimensional space where other beings could see him. So it's almost as if they changed the framework of the MacGuffin to suit the purposes of the storyteller. Other examples of the heavy lifting tools would be non-player characters that can be invented or brought into the story to make things happen. There could be antagonists and alter protagonists that are also added to manipulate the game, and these are done to give the game master the ability to accomplish what he wants to do. And liberal use of any or all of them are great, but when a game master spends his time utilizing those heavy tools, such as a mentor NPC who suddenly shows up and is able to do the things the players need to accomplish, even though the players are not thinking of doing it themselves. This is a heavy lifting tool that ends up being more like a bludgeon to get the players to accomplish what you GM wants. These are all, of course, problematic. Next are the player deflection tools, and a player deflection tool are what a friend of mine calls the shiny objects in the viewpoint. This can be as simple as a story red herring that lets the game master lose the focus of the group for a moment or two and have them look at something else while he is working behind the scenes to fix or change something on the major side. It could also be a methodology of creating new NPCs that are intended not to help the story but to fine-tune the direction that the group goes in, and thereby manipulates the outcome that the game master wants. And it's not always, these things, while they are useful, again, are not specifically intended to drive the story, but end up being something that the game master can use to push the story along. These player deflection tools, along with the other types of defenses we're talking about, are fundamentally utilized to maintain the sovereignty of the story over whatever challenges the game master has perceived occurring in the game. Finally, there are game master fine adjustment tools, and these are usually those places in the story where the game master has allowed some form of agency, but at the same time utilizes it as a lever. The concept of a wizard's familiar, or a criminal contact, or something like that the game master has allowed for the players to have, he turns around and uses fundamentally as an inverse access tool to adjust the story, the attitudes, the themes, and everything that's going on, so that he accomplishes what he wants. Now, all of that brings us around to plot armor. And what is plot armor, and how it is applied? Plot armor is fundamentally a series of defenses put upon an NPC or a villain, a monster, or whatever, that the game master wants and needs to be protected so that the story can continue, in opposition to what the players may actually have as an interest. And this most commonly is referred to when you're speaking of an NPC that at some point is adversarial, and the games group decides that they want to attack or engage with this NPC or PC this NPC RPC or SPC in a way that would be damaging to them. And so this can also be applied in inverse, where the game master wants to keep the players alive and therefore provides them with an inordinate amount of protection. Wow. Pardon me. My voice is going. That's not good. But the idea here is that the plot armor is the artificial defense that is brought to bear in order to guide the direction of the story at the finest level. In other words, down where the players are where the rubber is meeting the road and the players are meeting the enemies in combat. Plot armor is used to either protect the players or to protect the villains, depending on the case. Now, how is it applied? Generally, plot armor, just like any other defense, is built into the concept of how the storyteller operates his turns, so that he can adjust or modify the die rolls that are necessary, as well as the outcomes of those die rolls in the execution of each turn. The biggest problem is that plot armor is probably, among all the other ones that I listed, is probably the least obvious to recognize, and yet is more than likely one of the more powerful tools that a storyteller can bring to bear. And I'm reminded of a game situation some years ago where my players had come to the decision while playing my game that I must have applied plot armor to all of them, because several fight scenes had gone player 10, game master, or monster 0. And none of them had received any damage. And so they assumed that that was because I was applying some form of plot armor. Well, in reality, the perceived plot armor can simply be because you're rolling badly as a storyteller. Game masters, if they're following the caprices of dice, are going to have as many good days as they have bad days, and therefore it's going to seem sometimes that they can do no right, just like in other times they can seem like they do no wrong. So, therefore, the problem is that you have to worry about the perception that players have of what's going on. So, how do you properly use the plot armor, the finance tool, finance? There's Freudian for you. Fine adjustment tools, deflection, and so on. How do the game masters use these judiciously? The best way to use them is to use them very infrequently. Because of its intensity, plot armor should be used almost never, which comes back to an important point that's available within the NycosRPG that is very rarely found in other games, and that is the ability to bring back balance simply by determining the times and conditions wherein you allow die rolls. So villains, if they have not the capability to deal damage to the players, are not being utilized properly, because if they are unable to do damage, then there would be no engagement. Nobody wants to fight a losing battle. Nobody wishes to run that risk. So bringing the balance back simply means giving the players the equal standing with whatever your villains are, and letting the conflict flip on dice rolls only when that suits your purposes. Remember, the key is that in NycosRPG, as it is in every case, but it's not explicitly said, there are no requirements for any dice rolls to ever be made. A storyteller could flat out be a storyteller if he wishes and never roll a dice. Now, that's not fun for the players, that's not useful for the dynamics of a roleplay game, and I don't recommend it, but it's absolutely true. There's no need for the die rolls, because the only point the die rolls should be included is when a random factor is desired by the players and the game master. So even your players may not want to have die rolls per se if what they want to do is just convey stories back and forth. So realize that. Now, one of the biggest challenges when dealing with any of these defenses is the acknowledgement that they exist and that you are, to a greater or lesser extent, utilizing them or using their effects in game. So the first choice in this, therefore, is to be able to recognize your own defensiveness. If you feel that you have to hold back or compete, yay! Welcome, Huzo. Nice to have you with us. If we are going to be resolving the number of these defenses that we as a game master use and acknowledge them, then we can downplay our own defensiveness and stop trying to hide behind the various forms of defense. Sometimes you just simply want a situation to go a certain way, so why can't that be something that's discussed? Guys, we're going into this chamber, and it would be really cool visually if we're going to do it this way, and have the players agree or disagree and adjust their actions accordingly. Don't feel that you have to be defensive when something is mentioned. Simply look at it and analyze whether or not it's true. Now, this does need to mean that you need to reconcile player concerns. If you have a player who feels like he's never at risk in a game because you're always giving him the benefit of the doubt and you're always giving in to their actions, recognize that and reconcile those issues by disarming whichever defense you're using. If it's plot armor, stop letting them have the saving throws. Give them a saving throw and let the saving throw save them. Don't feel like you have to. The point is that the character in the story is intended to be a free agent, if you will, within the framework, and your only purpose as a game master is to help them thread their way through the adventure and through the theme of the story. If the player's concern is that they're not getting enough defense, then consider what ways you might be able to utilize some of the other tools we talked about to accomplish this without overtly depending too heavily on the much hated plot armor. And then finally, you need to realize that sometimes when people bring things up into conversation about a game, their concerns are not actually even adversarial. They just are wanting you to be aware of it, and so perhaps realize that you might need to just disarm and stand down from any conflict, because there may not be a conflict. It may simply be that the players are not unaware of what's going on, and they want you as a player, as a game master, to also be aware. So when you are involved in a game, realize that yes, the storyteller is going to, especially if he's got any time behind the shield, so to speak, he's going to have a large number of resources at his disposal, from flat out walls in the story where there is no yes for the character to find, to the defenses of the story itself that intrinsically leave you not following that pursuit, or the heavy lifting tools that he just hammers into place to make sure that happens the way he wants. But any number of these tools are really there to make sure that the story flows. And to a very tight-fisted railroader, these are going to be much more stringent and much more clearly defined and much more, if you will, confining. And to a sandboxier game master, they're going to be much more hands-off, much less use of them, and rarely will you see any of the plot armor or other sharp utensils used on the players. But that does conclude my wrap-up of the very concept of plot armor. And while it is not something that is embraced by many game masters, nonetheless it is evident in most at one point or another, and as a player, once you're aware of it, you can work within the confines of it or find places where you can discuss it with your storyteller and game master. So I want to thank you for staying with us for the narrative portion of today's event. This is Jonathan Albin, the game master, and this has been Game Master Soapbox, and we've been talking about the constructive or destructive use of plot armor. Thank you very much.